how long have you got here like earlier?
Welcome to the IDB Pavilion of the Americas, where we turn conversation into action. We are here for the Education and Climate Change in Latin America and the Caribbean panel. We are delighted to have Vicegobernadora within us, Hannah Gassam Tuma. Thank you, we're delighted to have you. I'm going to introduce to our social manager from the IDB, Fernando Regalia. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IDB panel on building skill for climate action. I'm Fernando Regalia. I'm the social sector manager at the IDB, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. Today we have a great panel, and I'm honored to be joined by this set of distinguished panelists. Let me start with a very short run of presentation. So we are joined by Hannah Gassam Tuma, Vice Governor of the state of Pará. We know that the state is a strong advocate for the education vital role in climate action. So we are really looking forward to hear from you. We're also joined by Sarah Berdmore, who leads the strategic partnership at the Global Partnership for Education and the GP efforts on climate smart education system. Welcome, Sarah. By Matteo Perrone. Matteo is the World Food Program Country Director for Ecuador, but also it is in role of leading the WFP delegation from Latin America to COP28. We're also joined by Sergio Venegas Marin. He's an economist at the World Bank in the global practice, and he leads the project at the intersection of climate change and education. And finally, Maria Soledad Bosch. She's an education lead specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank, and she coordinates the work of the ADB on social investment and climate change. Really a warm welcome to all of you. So for those who have been enjoying this week in COP, the nexus between human capital development and climate has been central. And education plays a very critical role in this nexus. So let me start with Soledad. Drawing from the latest publication that the DB has produced on this subject, what are the primary challenges and opportunities that we find in this nexus between climate change and education? And how can education contribute to tackle these challenges and opportunity?
Thank you, Ferdinando. As you mentioned, we had just published a document that talks about education and climate change in Latin America, and there we found key challenges that the education systems are facing because of climate change, but we also realize that education plays a vital role in the climate change agenda, and it has value to add in this climate change agenda. One of the first things we realize is that in Latin America and the Caribbean, children and youth are really not learning much about climate change, sustainability, and biodiversity. We don't have very good numbers, but we see, for example, with the latest results of PISA that were released this week, that only like 50% of students 15 years old know about science in Latin America and the Caribbean, and usually climate change has been taught in science, so we can infer that they really don't know much about these topics in Latin America and the Caribbean. We also know that the same 15-year-olds, one quarter of them don't really know about climate change, so that's an issue that we need to tackle. And they also feel disempowered to take action on climate change. And that is added to a lot of deficiencies in basic skills. Again, we just got the release of the PISA results. We know that, for example, 75% of students don't have basic mathematics skills, and those are key to keep learning through life and face the world that they're going to see that is going to keep changing. So we have key challenges on what they know and they can do about climate change. So what we want to see is graduating students from secondary education and continue studying and become really true green citizens of the world. And we conceive this concept as them knowing about climate change, biodiversity, and sustainability, but also valuing and caring about the environment and having these 21st century skills of communication, problem solving, capacity of action, so that they can take action on behalf of the environment. So we envision children and youth graduating from school as true green citizens. But another thing that we learn is that climate change impacts schooling. Like, we know that hurricanes, flooding, and even high temperatures is impacting the amount of time that students spend in school and the time that they need to be learning. We saw in Central America that Hurricane Eta, Iota destroyed 1,000 schools. They needed to stop schooling like a whole month before the end of the school year. So if they're not in school, they can't be learning, and we need them to be in school. So we know that we can increase the sustainability and the resilience of schools so that the schooling can't be that interrupted. And one final thought is that education system have a carbon footprint, and we can support governments in Latin America and the Caribbean to decrease the carbon footprint of the education services by building schools that can save water, can save energy, but also not only to decrease the carbon footprint, but also because it's an opportunity for children to learn about sustainable lives and how to have sustainability in school and then carry it on into their daily lives. So these are the things that we saw in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we're hoping that with the work that we're doing at the IDB, we can both graduate green citizens of the world, but also increase the resiliency and the sustainability of the education systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Soledad. Let me go to the Vice Governor. The commitment of Pará with the environment can be seen in all the areas of your government. We particularly like to see that Pará is a pioneer in including these issues related to climate change and sustainability in its educations and school. Can you tell us what motivated your government to do so and how you did it?
Bom dia a todos e a todas. Um prazer muito grande estar aqui representando o nosso estado do Pará nesse evento de tamanha importância. Quero cumprimentar aqui a todos os nossos painelistas, começando pelo Fernando Regalha, um prazer estar aqui, a Sara Berdimore, Mateu Perrone, Sérgio Venegas Marim, um prazer estar aqui, e Maria Soledade Bossi. O que nos motiva é perceber a oportunidade dos nossos quase 600 mil jovens estudantes da rede pública estadual, crianças e adolescentes, estarem sendo preparados como multiplicadores do conhecimento sobre as questões ambientais, sobre as questões climáticas, e que eles possam levar esse conhecimento para a sua família e para a sua comunidade.
Thank you all very much for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here, and I would like to salute all the members of the panel, starting by Mr. Regalia, also Ms. Sarah Beardmore, Mr. Mateo Perrone, Mr. Sergio Venegas Marim, and Maria Soledad. It is a pleasure to be here representing the state of Pará. To answer your question, what motivates us is realizing the opportunity that we have to turn our 600,000 students into multipliers. Children and teenagers prepared to share the knowledge about climate issues, environmental issues, and to also bring this kind of knowledge to their families and to their communities.
Implantamos a educação ambiental como uma disciplina obrigatória nas escolas públicas do Pará e vamos multiplicar estudantes conscientes como defensores e guardiões da nossa Amazônia e do nosso planeta.
We have introduced environmental education in our education system as a mandatory subject in the public schools of our state. And we're going to multiply the awareness, having students who are advocates and guardians of our environment.
A disciplina está prevista em lei. Permite várias ações fundamentais para o maior conhecimento e reconhecimento dos nossos estudantes no meio que eles vivem. A partir dessa educação ambiental, eles ampliam conhecimentos, ferramentas e ganham autonomia para usá-las de forma mais consciente.
The subject is mandatory, provided by law, and it allows for various actions that are fundamental to our students' greater knowledge and recognition of the environment in which they live.
Nos motiva muito mais porque esses eventos extremos afetam aquelas populações com maior vulnerabilidade social, como indígenas, quilombolas e ribeirinhos. Por isso a nossa preocupação de imediatamente já começar esse trabalho.
We are even more motivated because of the vulnerable communities. Communities like the riverside dwellers, those living in marooned communities called quilombolas in Brazil, they are much more subjected to climate changes, and this is what motivates us even more.
Estamos muito felizes e orgulhosos por sermos sede da COP30, na nossa capital, Belém. E já começamos desde junho um trabalho efetivo em relação a disseminar essa informação para toda a sociedade paraense. Quero aqui cumprimentar o nosso secretário de Educação, que está presente aqui. E no material didático deste ano, nós já fizemos um concurso entre os alunos, orientado pelos professores, onde o desenho da capa do material didático foi sobre a COP30 no nosso estado.
We are very honored to be hosting COP28 in our state. So since last month of June, we started in our education system to include the topic in our course materials, so that we can share to all the society, all the civil society in our state. Also, I would like to salute, to greet our Secretary of Education, who is here present in the audience.
Além desse material, os alunos participam nas salas de aula sobre discussões ambientais. E vamos ter outras edições desse concurso de desenhos para os próximos 2 anos também, para que eles se sintam parte do processo, o que é muito importante para nós. A educação, além da educação ambiental, temos esse olhar na arte, para conquistar os nossos jovens, as nossas crianças, através da arte. As gerações atuais e futuras do nosso Pará estão sendo incentivadas na escola a protagonizar o compromisso com a Amazônia e com o planeta.
We have held art contests so the students can produce their work related to the environment, which are included in the school materials, and they have discussions guided by their teachers in the classrooms. We are going to have another 2 years of these contests with students until we get to COP28. This means that we introduce art in this generation so that they can value that together with the environmental issues.
Muito obrigado, vice-governadora. Vocês estão sendo verdadeiramente pioneiros na inclusão da mudança climática, nas questões educacionais, e que vão ser exemplo para toda a região e globalmente. I'm going to turn now to Sergio. I'm going to come back to you on the expectation for COP30. Sergio, you work in the global practice at the World Bank. What are the impact you see on your work on education of the climate change discussion? And what notable effects are observed in your sectors And how do you envision leveraging education for climate adaptation and mitigation? And we need to speak loud because we need to talk over the other panel.
I'll try my best. First of all, thank you for having me as part of this panel. I'm excited to be here to talk about this important topic. I must say, as we started working on this topic, the first thing that became really clear to us is that we didn't have as much information as maybe other sectors had. For every paper that is looking at the impacts of climate change on education, there are 5 or 6 papers that looked at the impact of climate change on agriculture, on economic growth, on health outcomes. So we're really talking about a sector that has been underlooked in the past few years. So we're still playing a little bit of catch-up in terms of understanding the impacts of climate change on education, as well as the strategic solutions that the sector can offer for climate change mitigation. Yet we do have enough evidence to pinpoint some of the threats, and they comprise of a variety of pathways that have direct and indirect impacts. We do know, and Sarah and Soledad mentioned some of those. We do know that heat, for instance, has a very negative and significant impact on learning outcomes by making school environments less conducive to learning. We do see a lot of compelling evidence that shows that students who are exposed to a high number of extremely hot days prior to an exam tend to perform worse in those assessments. We also see that those impacts tend to be larger for the most vulnerable students, and so on. So, in essence, the evidence is saying that above certain thresholds, temperature-wise, it's just not possible to concentrate at the same level as if it was a lower temperature. So cognitive ability is impacted once you reach certain temperatures. So countries that are already experiencing high temperatures will probably experience larger impacts as the temperature rises in future years. We also see other extreme weather events are going to have impacts on learning outcomes through school closures. And the anecdotal evidence is infinite on this side. Just last year in 2022, we saw over 800 schools were destroyed in Mozambique, and that led to months-long school closures for the students impacted. We saw 5% of the student population in Malawi losing access to school because of Cyclone Freddy. We also saw 3.5 million students losing access to schooling because of the monsoon flooding in Pakistan. So lots of incidents that showcase the large impact that school closures can have on learning outcomes, and also in terms of enrollment, as many of the students don't come back after the schools reopen. Beyond those direct impacts, we also see indirect impacts. So we do see that through climate change, we experience economic shocks, we experience health shocks, we experience displacement in many regions of the world, and all of this translates into households having to cope with those shocks. And in many cases, that leads to diminished demand for schooling and higher dropouts, or just lower access to schooling overall in certain regions of the world. So this growing body of evidence, what it's saying in essence is that the impacts are going to be large, and they're going to be increasing over time on a gradual basis. If you compare year to year, maybe the incremental impact is not as large, but when you think of the absolute size of the impact, we need to be adapting a lot quicker than we are. In essence, when it comes to the direct impacts, what we're learning from the evidence is that one day in which the students are not able to concentrate because of high temperatures is a day in which learning is lost. One day in which the schools are closed because of a climate shock is a day in which learning does not happen. So it's a one-to-one relationship. Every school day that is impacted by climate change is a day in which learning does not happen. So the key message for the education sector is that we need to be accelerating adaptation a lot faster than we currently are. And I think part of it is building a narrative that integrates adaptation as part of our current efforts to improve learning. It shouldn't be looked at as a distraction from our effort to improve learning. If anything, We have to adapt because we have to protect those learning gains, because we have to protect the gains that we have achieved in recent years. So we have to accelerate that adaptation process if we want our impact of all those efforts to improve learning to actually pay off. But at the same time, adaptation, even with the best practices, is not the complete story. We do have to put a lot of effort into mitigation, because at the moment we have very different climate scenarios on the table. And which path we're eventually on is going to be determined by our ability to cut emissions. And here I have a simple message that I'm going to be repeating over and over in all the panels today. And that is that the global community is just underutilizing one of the most powerful tools we have for climate action. And that is education. Education is the strongest predictor of climate change awareness. It's highly correlated with concern for the environment, highly correlated with support for policies that benefit the environment, and it can also be strategically used for climate action in terms of climate education for behavior change, which we know is happening in the state of Pará, and then also for skilling for green transitions. At the end of the day, we're at COP28. We're talking about NDC commitments. We're talking about large-scale policy shifts that require that you have populations that support those policy changes, and that require that you have populations that are able to implement those policies. And I think education systems are in a unique position to make that a reality. So I could go on, but I can just finish by saying education is a powerful tool for climate action, but to realize the magic of education, we really have to protect it, and we have to leverage it effectively.
No, thank you, Sergio. And I really want to stress the last part of all your important messages, together with what the Vice Governor said before. It's quite striking that if you look at the NCDs and the LTS in the region, very, very, very few even mention the issue of skills, and this is particularly relevant for the most vulnerable population. There is no way that we can think about this population really being involved into transition to net zero without a strong emphasis, and it's all up to us, I think, to accelerate that discussion and that picture within the strategy. Sarah, I would like to talk to you about the role of the GPE. You have put forward a strategy that talks about climate smart education system, and really your key mandate is to support the Ministry of Education in their institutional strengthening to really embed this discussion in the day-to-day activity. So how your organization is supporting ministries around the world in this agenda?
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to join this esteemed panel. So the Global Partnership for Education works with about 90 of the low and lower middle income countries around the world, and we increasingly were in dialogue with ministries of education that were saying, you know, we're experiencing a recurrent crises. This is no longer once every 100 years, but annually we have climate impacts on our education system, and we need more support to address these impacts. So when we looked across the system, what we saw was a lot of very siloed and fragmented efforts. You have maybe a disaster risk reduction strategy over there, and an education for sustainable development framework over here, and none of these pieces were actually connecting to each other in a more coherent way. So we developed the Climate Smart Education System framework to try to define what the education systems of the future need to look like, and what the 7 dimensions are in which climate change can be considered transversally. These dimensions include policy and planning, coordination, finance, data, but also teaching and learning, infrastructure, and communities, because they have strong linkages to schools. And the idea was to actually look across all of these dimensions to see where are the entry points for us to be able to promote a climate smart education. And we define that as an education system that's able to guarantee the right to education and ensure educational continuity when crises hit. but also an education that promotes sustainable development, that protects the planet, that teaches us how to preserve our very fragile life systems upon which we depend. But thirdly, we need education systems that are also able to promote climate justice. We need to look at inequality. We need to ensure that they are redressing the imbalances and seeding the possibility for a more just and equal society. And in order to deliver that in lower and lower middle income countries, there are major challenges. So our initiative has really been to work with ministries of education to try to help them prioritize where the entry points are based on their context. So what you do in Somalia is going to look very different from what you might do in Tonga. It's going to be completely different from what's required in a place like Haiti. And by working with ministries of education, we're first of all initiating a kind of technical assistance initiative that we're rolling out across over 20 of the most climate vulnerable countries in the partnership. And that really looks at, from a policy and planning perspective, are there policies in place that help the ministries of education coordinate more effectively with departments for disaster risk management? Are there risk management strategies in place? Are there policies that actually outline the kind of curricular efforts that are needed that then link also to teacher training and assessments and learning materials? So trying to look across all the dimensions of the system to see if one change in one dimension of the system is interdependent on other changes across, is there coherence at a systemic level? So we're at the very beginning of this work, but I think ultimately the goal is not just to have a capacity within the ministries of education to put green skills at the heart of what they're achieving, but also to make sure there's financing available to implement this. So on the heels of our technical assistance support to ministries, we're also partnering with the Green Climate Fund to mobilize climate finance, co-financed with us, to ensure that all education systems across all countries are climate resilient. I think at the end of the day, we need to see that green skills are not just one module in science or geography that teaches about the IPCC report and carbon emissions. What we need is actually to ensure that it's transversal across all subjects and all ages and grade levels. We need to make sure that there's not just content of knowledge, but that we're looking at interactive, participatory pedagogies that are teaching by doing, learning by doing, because ultimately we need to prepare a population of young people for a future that we cannot predict. And we need people to have the adaptive skills to be able to respond to a future that is going to look very different from the one we face today. But finally, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we also need socio-emotional learning, because the psychosocial impacts of what we are facing, we are living in a current climate emergency. The emergencies that we're facing, I think, have doubled. There's now 400 on average extreme weather events, and over the next 20 years, that's going to increase by another 320%. And we need to be equipped not just with the mindsets and the skills and the knowledge, but also with the emotional ability to handle and hold that grief and move through it into action. Because that is the only thing that is going to drive us out of this crisis and into a future upon which we are living sustainably in harmony with nature and humanity. So that's the vision that we've set out, but we have a very long path ahead of us, and we need all of our partners here on the panel and beyond to work together to support ministries of education with this very important work.
Thank you, Sarah, and also let me take the opportunity to thank the partnership with GP in many areas, and this will be one where we will be actively involved to work with you, because as you say, it's a long path ahead, but I think these four are super important to strengthen this partnership and set the path going forward. So thank you very much. Let me turn now to Matteo. I'm going to focus my question on one aspect of education, which is school feeding. It's a very important aspect, and we are really extremely satisfied with the collaboration we have in Latin America between IDB and the World Food Programme, reflected also in the first joint publication on the status of school feeding in Latin America, which was issued at the end of last year. How can these programs, school feeding, be enhanced and adapted given the challenges that climate change is posing to the region? Really, I think you have a wealth of knowledge in WFP that you'd like to share with us.
Yes, thank you very much for having me in this panel. And let me start by saying that Latin America and the Caribbean is a region that is exposed to climate crisis very much. We have hurricanes, floods, we have drought, more and more in terms of intensity and frequency. It's a region where we have more than 40 million people that are food insecure, 10 million and a half that are severely food insecure, and we have 18 million kids that are not at school. So the situation is a little bit tricky, knowing also that it's a region where we have the cost to have access to a healthy diet is the highest of the world. So how all of this is impacting the kids and how they are learning and how the education is impacted? Well, first of all, when we have a climate crisis, often kids, they don't have schools anymore because they are washed out, because the system collapsed, because governments are dedicating their budgets, their finances in responding to this crisis. So school meals, school feeding programs are left out from the budget of of the countries. But it also impacts the families, and when the family is impacted, the kids are impacted. In Ecuador, we have many kids that don't go to school because they have to help their parents in the field, because the parents and the families are in a situation of extreme poverty. So how do we do, or how we contribute to get back these kids to school? In various ways. From a national perspective, we work with governments, we work with financial institutions when a disaster strike, through the connection of disaster risk finance to government social protection. And we have a case, an example is Nicaragua, that after the Hurricane Julia, we work with the CRIF in responding and to using the schools as a platform for distributing aid. Specifically, we provided a second meal in schools, and we provided take-home rations for the families. And this has been very effective and very, very rapid. And then we work at the local level and individual level in two ways. One, from an infrastructural perspective. We have this kitchen in a box, in a container, that are self-sufficient, off the grid, climate friendly, with solar panel, water distribution system, filtering system. And we use also this approach to spread a little bit new techniques for agriculture that are more resilient to climate change. And then we have the case of, we'll bring my home, Ecuador, where we have a program where simply we procure food from smallholder farmers that are around the schools. And the benefits of this model are multiple. The first one is that the kids are receiving fresh meals, nutritious food in schools. For the families, it's a big help because they don't have to provide food to the kids, or at least they know that they have one meal covered per day. So the families are encouraged to send the kids to school. The second is that the investment stays in the territory where the schools are. So there is no investment that are going only to 1, 2, 3 companies, but they are spread into the community, and the money stays in the community. And then we cut off the logistics. There is no logistics in our programs because the food is produced next to the school. And I think that Brazil is a very good example that understands the value of having smallholder farmers involved in the supply chain, in the procurement, in the providing food to the schools. So these are only 3 small examples that we are using in this sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matteo. And I'm not going to ask the Vice Governor about Brazil's strategy on school feeding, because probably is one of the largest, most well-known program in the world. But I would like to ask you, going back to COP30, your beautiful state is going to host COP30. Vice Governor, what would you like to see and to show to the world in 2 years of what Pará has done in this work between education and the climate change agenda?
A nossa meta no estado do Pará é ser o estado brasileiro que mais elevou os índices da educação básica nos próximos anos. Essa é a nossa grande meta. Para isso, estamos intensificando muitos esforços. E um deles é com a colaboração do próprio Banco de Desenvolvimento, o BID, que nos ajuda nesse processo. Estamos reformando, ampliando e construindo escolas no nosso estado. Estamos aperfeiçoando a qualificação dos professores. Também implementamos programa de meritocracia, tanto para alunos quanto para o corpo técnico da Secretaria de Educação. E, além disso, a disciplina da educação ambiental é uma ação fundamental para que a gente possa formar lideranças jovens, que possam nos ajudar na atuação em prol das mudanças climáticas e do meio ambiente. Por isso, estamos construindo e organizando a COP Infanto-Juvenil, a COP antes da COP 30. Essa COP vai ser uma reunião de milhares de estudantes da rede pública, trazendo trocas de experiências para o nosso estado e para o nosso país. E na COP 30 precisamos garantir o protagonismo dessas vozes, dando visibilidade e reconhecimento à importância da participação das crianças e dos adolescentes nessas discussões, nos debates e nas construções das soluções para a crise do clima.
Our goal for COP in Pará is for our state to be the one with the highest increase in the index of basic education development in these coming 2 years. We are stepping up our efforts. We are including with the support of the IDB in this regard to renovate, to expand, and to build schools. We're also investing in school infrastructure and teaching materials. We're improving teachers' qualifications, implementing meritocracy programs for both students and teachers. And so we're going to guarantee this improvement in this development index in the state of Pará. In addition, the subject of environmental education is a fundamental action if we are to form youth leaders who are confident in the debate on climate change. That's why we are building and organizing the Children and Youth COP in our state. It will be a meeting of more than 600 public school students from all over the world to exchange experiences. This way, we are prioritizing children and adolescents in the debates and the policies aimed at tackling climate change. And at COP30, we need to guarantee the leading role of these voices, giving visibility and recognition to the importance of their participation from those students in the Amazon, in the debate, and in building solutions to climate crisis.
Finally, I want to invite everyone to the COP30 on Pará, on Amazônia, on Brasil. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Estamos todo el mundo muy entusiasmados, and we really wish you the best. We will accompany you in this process, and hopefully we are going to be all there in 2 years. And just to conclude, 1 minute each. What would you like to see in this nexus between climate actions and education until COP30? 1 minute each.
I mean, my wish list for the next 3 years.
1 minute.
1 minute. I mean, earlier I mentioned that the education system has been largely overlooked in a way. So in the next 2 years, I simply hope that we gain more agreement into what the role of education needs to be on climate change mitigation. I think we're making a lot of progress on what the impacts are and the need for adaptation. It's less clear how to integrate education in the climate action agenda in a central role. So I do hope that over the next 2 years, we're able to clarify the narrative and integrate it within the overall climate agenda.
Sarah.
I'm going to agree completely with Sergio. I think what we'd like to see, actually, I'm really thrilled that today they'll be launching a common agenda for climate and education political declaration. It already has 37 member states that have committed to integrating education into their nationally determined contributions, their national adaptation plans, and to invest in education as a climate strategy. So by COP 2030, we want to see that membership of signatories increased to a universal number of countries. We're very pleased Brazil has already endorsed the declaration, and by COP 2030, we need to have a global action plan for this agenda.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I joined my colleagues, and I would like to see more education in COP, in the next COPs, more young people. At the end of the day, they will be the ones who's going to bear the burden of this change, and to use education as a platform for new ideas and new ways of doing things. I mean, I think always of my kids, and I would like to see more of my kids in this COP.
Soledad.
One of the things that we're seeing is that climate change is impacting the education of the most vulnerable, and also that the students that are most vulnerable, rural and poorer, are the ones that have the less amount of skills to access the opportunities that are going to come with the transition to net zero. So what I want to see in COP30 is strategies that will help them, those most vulnerable, those most poor, be able to take opportunities and fully participate in all these opportunities that are coming with the transition to net zero, and also have the right set of skills to be able to adapt to all the impacts that climate change will bring to their daily lives. Thank you.
Thank you. We are to the closing. I think it was a very interesting conversation, very inspiring. I want to thank all the panelists, and I want to thank you, Vice Governor, for the honor of being here with us today. Count on all our support in the preparation to COP20, really to have and build globally more resilient, more sustainable education system, but particularly mobilizing the youth as agent of change. We really need them, and we really need them to be the next professional in the future to be involved in this agenda and the driver of this agenda. Thank you all very, very much. Muito obrigado.